so we make sure we get everybody that's on the phone. I know some people have already checked in, but we'll go ahead and get started. So if you're on the phone, please just let me know when I call your name. DeGraff, Dr. Lynch. Okay, I heard Dr. Seth sign in. Dr. Ellie from Medina. Dr. Vargo, Mount St. Mary's. Dr. Kaluri, Niagara Falls. Dr. Peterson, UMMC. Mr. Knowles here. Dr. Farney is on the phone. Brooks, Dr. Krozik. Jones, Dr. Edwards. Olean, Dr. Singer. Westfield, Dr. Stevenson. WCA, Dr. Falk. Mr. Reisner.
Todd, John.
Todd, thank you. Okay, Dr. Walters. Bertrand Chafee, Dr. Wenner. Buffalo General, Dr. Borton. Buffalo Mercy, Dr. Cosgrove. Dr. Clemency is not here today. Dr. Bart. Kenmore Mercy, Dr. Martin. I heard Dr. Mangione sign in on the phone. Dr. McNamara is here from Suburban. Dr. Kenyon is on the phone. St. Joe's, Dr. Krozik. Sisters, Dr. Visser. VA, Dr. McGee. Wyoming County, Dr. Collins. Regional Council Rep, Mr. Gill. Dr. Teuscher. Very good, thank you. Dr. Doran. Dr. Natanelli. Thank you, John. Thank you. Let's see, Nurse Advisory Committee, we are reconstituting. All right, thank you, Ed. Where am I? Beth Moses is on the phone.
Mike, this is Dr.
What?
This is Dr. Anaj in place of Dr. McGee.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Department of Health, Mr. Major, Mr. Trepaz, or Ms. Rowinski. All right. Southwestern Remsco, Ms. King, Ms. Broadbent.
We are here.
Great. Mr. McCartan, Mr. Shaw are here. Great, okay. All right, we do have a quorum. We'll go ahead and get started. First order of business would be to review the meeting, May meeting minutes. They were attached to the agenda sent out in advance. They are in the meeting packet today. Please take a second to review those, and I would love a motion to accept last month's meeting minutes.
Motion.
So moved.
Who's there? Teuscher and so McNamara, second to Teuscher. Great. The minutes are accepted. The REMAC correspondence log is attached, and we will, let's see, I don't know that there's I haven't heard an update from CMAC SEMSCO. Dr. Barton, Dr. Walters are not able to join us today, so we will touch base with them next month. Beth, you're on the phone for Trauma Advisory Committee.
Yes, we did not have a meeting in the past month, but I would like to remind our EMS partners to when they're using the Muru app, to recognize that the call button is the line for med direction for ECMC. And if they are calling trauma pre-notification, they need to scroll down in the app to find that number. We're just having, it did pick up on a couple of calls that went to the med direction line that were meant for trauma notification because they were pushing that button.
Okay, yep, so yeah, please make sure that if you're using Muru and you hit call that you need medical direction. Otherwise, scroll down a little bit, get the trauma notification number, You know, and if you call Med Direction and tell us that you're calling it a pre-notification, it's not that we're being jerks, but we're gonna hang up the phone. We're gonna ask you to call the trauma line. So it's just delaying a little bit, and obviously the sooner we can get out pre-notifications for patients that meet criteria, the better for everybody. So please make a note of that. Pass it on to your agency. Anything else, Beth? You said no meeting.
No
Okay.
meeting scheduled, probably fall.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Just wanted to let people know from the OSHI side though, that the number is the same, for pre-notification and medical direction. So it's the 323-2110 is the number, just for clarification.
Got it. All right, so for OSHI, use the same number. For ECMC, make sure you scroll down if you're just pre-notifying and hit call if you're actually using, need medical direction. Okay, Nurse Advisory Committee, like I said, is being reconstituted, so I anticipate in the next, maybe September or October, well, September or November meeting, we will have a Nurse Advisory Committee representative. So that brings us to program agency reports, and we'll start with STEM.
Hello, my report was included with the agenda. Just a few things to highlight. Our EMT class is going to be starting in the summer. We have 15 people in that, so we're looking forward to that academy-style class. We held a CLI class since the last meeting. We partnered with Jefferson County and Mid-State. We had 10 people complete that. And we were also holding a series of simulation training courses taught by Jerry Cummins. We have one more left. Upcoming, we are doing a Stepping into Leadership program. The dates are on my report. If anyone's interested in our region of taking that, they can contact me. And lastly, we've just been having a lot of agencies are submitting their skills on time, so we're looking forward to that next deadline next Friday and having all of our agencies complete what they need to. And that is the end of my report.
All right, thank you very much. UBMD, Rob and Mike.
Like STEMS, we as well has sent our report in, which is attached to the email that went out. But a few things, credentialing as well. The portal that we use was unlocked May 1st. I want to remind medical directors that in the Big Lakes and Wyoming Erie regions, medical directors for agencies have access to the portal that can view their agencies and what's going on within their agencies. We do have quite a few that have never logged in. If you're unfamiliar with it as a medical director, please reach out to us and we can resend links and get you on board with that. We, once again, we updated our name on Facebook. We're continuing to use that social media platform to drive information out along with our website. Following up on BLS certifications, updates, recertifications. We're still getting notifications of a lot of agencies that have not updated, so we're getting out there and making sure that they're compliant. And just a reminder of with that, you're at risk of losing your CME program if those certifications are not updated. Going back to the Muru app, the reason why that all took place was we had a lot of complaints about medical control numbers not being easy to find within the app. So with that said, the reason why the trauma number is not clear cut out in the open is because Muru did not have the capacity to do that at the time. It's something that they're looking at down the road, but right now it just wasn't able to be placed kind of right out there in sparkling colors under ECMC. But I would like to remind everybody too that that feature with that call button going to medical control is specific to hospitals in the Big Lakes and Wyoming Erie region right now. So if you transport to Rochester or any of that, it may not be set up, exactly the same. We had nothing under EMSC. For those of you who don't know, Eastern Niagara is now closed. Catholic Health has set up a standalone emergency department. It's now being known as the Mount St. Mary's Hospital ED in Lockport, and that will remain open until the new Lockport Hospital opens up. We did push information out with the floor plan that's on our website, so that's something that can be taken a look at. 2023 Vital Signs Conference, just a reminder on that. That'll be October 19th through the 22nd. If you plan on going, book your room now. They're filling up fast. Within our region, iGels, we're still receiving a lot of interest in that program. The Holland Fire District has submitted, and that was sent in, and the Shawnee Fire Department in Big Lakes has submitted. One thing to follow up with that as well is we've had agencies that have added personnel after the fact of getting the approval. And the way the iGel system works is that you have a list of providers that are able to take part in that study. So when somebody else is in service, that in-service information on that additional provider needs to be pushed out to the Hudson Valley because they have to have accountability for who is approved to do it. Our recruitment retention campaign is still underway. It's been a slow process with that website, but we've got a lot going on. We're still working on advertising and recruitment campaigns for different agencies, which we have done. And then the next state EMS meeting is in September 12th or 13th. One thing that I did miss on here is the Department of Health did push out those additional policies and procedures. The most recent is the mask update, basically following the CDC guidelines. And a report.
All right, thank you. That brings us to subcommittees. Dr. Walters and Dr. Bart are not here. There are no collaborative changes that we need to discuss today. QI, neither Dr. Borton nor Dr. Tanaka can join us today. However, I am aware of an item that has been referred to the REMAC for review. I'm going to refer it to the QI committee, but specifics are not important. But this is a case of a patient who had a tracheostomy in place, and EMS was called because the tracheostomy had been dislodged and the patient was in respiratory distress. An advanced EMT crew arrived to assist the local fire department and began transporting. They were concerned about the patient's clinical status, and they called the closest facility. Not to get medical direction, they called to notify we are coming in with kind of a flaming burger, if you will. And rather than say, okay, we'll see you when you get here, they were told to go to another hospital that was further away because that's where the trach was placed. And by the time of arrival at the receiving facility, the patient was peri-arrest and fortunately was able to be resuscitated and rescued with some airway maneuvers and suctioning. But this will be referred so that way the two facilities involved and the agencies involved can try to work towards not really a solution, but a better understanding of what happened. As the REMAC chair, I would remind everybody and all the providers on the phone that answer medical direction calls, right? When crews are calling you to say we're coming in with something we're worried about, right? The answer very seldom should be go somewhere else. The cases of that, of that would be things like traumas, STEMIs, strokes that need to be directed to an appropriate facility. But somebody who's having an airway emergency, any Article 28 emergency department should be able to do the initial steps to manage somebody's airway. So we will follow that up since it was brought to us by a receiving facility, and we will reach out to the agencies and the hospitals involved, and we'll try to work towards some sort of resolution to clarify that. But for now, please remember that when crews are calling you to notify, it really should be okay. Thanks. We'll see you. You see when you get here. We'll get ready for you, unless there's a very compelling reason, and the trach was put in there is irrelevant. At the time that it's dislodged, right? That's an airway emergency. We needed to help that person a little bit sooner, I think, but let's just all try to keep that in mind because it's the patients that it's all about.
Dr. O'Brien also emphasized the other side of that, where if there's agencies or crews that have this come up, please reach out to the facility representatives, reach out to us if that happens as well, because we want to know if that happens, like in this case, so that we can get on top of it too.
Thank you, Dr. McNamara. Oh, yeah, thanks. Okay, that's it for QI. The Ad Hoc Medical Direction Committee, unfortunately, Dr. Walters is not here, but he did send his medical direction draft policy that we had discussed in the past. There were several questions that were raised in terms of, is there a national standard for recording medical direction calls? And is this something that the WREMAC wants to get into? Dr. Walters' draft is attached, and it was attached to the agenda. I will share an email that he sent to us since he was not able to be here. And I'm just going to read it more or less verbatim so I don't mince words or miss any of his message. Let's see, okay. Agency and system online medical control. Medical directors or physicians acting as part of an organized system providing online medical control outside the hospital may do so provided they meet all of the above criteria. Those are unchanged. Online medical control physicians must also meet provider requirements, et cetera, no substantive changes there. Okay, regarding whether or not to require the recording of calls. Number one, the Bureau does not have a policy, nor does Article 30 or Part 800 that really speaks to this and certainly doesn't require recording calls. There is a section in regulation in Part 80 related to controlled substances that requires a physician providing medical control to make and maintain a record of the call. It does not specify that this be a written record. It would seem that a recorded record would suffice and meet the spirit of that requirement. Since not all EDs keep formal written records of online medical control orders, I would think that recordings would be a good practice for hospitals or agency medical directors to ensure they meet this regulation. Regarding whether there is a national standard for this, the National Association of EMS Physicians textbook, which is called Emergency Medical Services, Clinical Practice, and Systems Oversight, states online medical direction, there has been significant discussion about the importance of communication between the base station physician and the EMS medical director regarding quality assurance and performance improvement, although developing this relationship would be less effective without reliable and recordable communications between base station physicians and pre-hospital providers. The rapid development of cellular phone networks has led to the increased use of a method of this as a method of contacting base stations for medical orders and 1280 kg transmissions. Maintaining a recording of these radio or phone consultations is essential to the QA and performance improvement process and must be a consideration in system design. While the discussion of online medical direction to this point has focused on the emergency department base station, there are jurisdictions that may rely on the medical director or directors for online medical direction. While this practice may provide significant benefit to the system, communications should be routed through a central communications center where a recording can be maintained for QA and process improvement purposes. In discussions after the last meeting, a comparison was made to verbal telephone orders from providers to nurses in a hospital. But for these verbal orders, a physician still has to eventually sign off either on a paper or a computer order eventually. No such mechanism exists for online medical control to EMS providers. As such, a recorded online medical control order would serve as a record of these physician orders. Anytime you want to transfer a patient to a tertiary center, just about every hospital around here records their transfer lines to resolve any QA issues or discrepancies during the transfer. If that is the standard, then shouldn't we do the same for EMS online medical control? Recording phone calls appears to be possible in all health systems that have such transfer lines. Cloud-based or physical recording solutions, such as those available on Amazon, appear to be cost-effective and easy to implement, and I don't think, meaning Dr. Walters, there is much of a technology or cost barrier to implement this. So the draft policy was attached and sent out, right? The requirements that talk about the prerequisites to provide medical direction in the Western region must have an emergency department that meets all standards for emergency department and service as defined in Section 405 of the New York Hospital Code. Have a physician or APP staff member physically present in the emergency department and immediately available that meets the provider requirements in this policy. Provide online medical direction for BLS and ALS agencies that transport patients to their facility and to facilities not able to provide online medical control. Accept patients requiring BLS and or ALS services who may have received EMS care under physician direction originating from another medical control hospital. Maintain direct two-way radio and or compatible telephones available to communicate with BLS, ALS units and medical control hospitals in real time. Assume responsibility for the care and maintenance of necessary communications equipment within the institution. Familiarize staff members with approved regional and state protocols. Participate in local or regional EMS planning activities as appropriate. participate in quality improvement activities as defined in some subsection of New York State Hospital Code, participate in quality improvement activities as requested by the REMAC or system medical director as they relate to the provision of online medical control, designate a medical control director to be in charge of overall coordination of medical control in that facility, and assure facility and individual provider compliance with this policy. Record all audio from direct two-way radio and or compatible telephones providing online medical control and maintain recordings for quality assurance purposes. Below this in the draft policy are really the requirements to provide online medical direction, and those are not substantively changed. So, this is now before the REMAC, and the ask is to either approve or revise it. And I guess at this point I would open it for discussion. Any comments?
Dr. Walters is suggesting in his email, correct, that there should be some type of record keeping of every call.
Yes.
So I guess the question would be for, I know Dr. Wenger and Dr. Cosgrove were voicing the opposition towards every place having the ability to, have recordings. I would ask in kind of replacement of that to add to this, instead of if they think there's an institutional barrier or cost barrier, to then have the requirement to maintain a written, record of what the agency was that you spoke to on the phone, or some type of written record that in place of that. Because Dr. Walters email would suggest there needs to be some record of every call, whether it's written or recorded, and that might be a suitable, cost-effective alternative.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Was anything brought up about how long that certain record would be saved? So I know that in some of the larger institutions, sometimes there's a little bit of a worry about certain items being discoverable.
Well, I mean, I guess I sort of think my attitude on that is everything's discoverable, right? Your PCR, the ED notes, right? The dispatch times, the 911 recording, and I don't really see a reason why we should worry about what we're telling crews and that it may be discoverable. If we're giving good faith medical advice based on our sound medical judgment at the time, based on the information we're getting from the crew, which would also be on such a recording, right? While liability exists wherever a jury says it exists, right? I think that's a fairly safe practice and generally accepted throughout kind of the EMS systems that are around. However, how long to save that, I think, is going to be something that the REMAC really can't dictate to individual facilities who have their own, their own counsel, their own policies for how long they would record. They may keep transfer call recordings, et cetera. But that's a good question. Are there other thoughts? I heard somebody start to speak up on the phone.
Well, hey, Dad, so I can put my legal hat on. You probably should keep it for 2.5 years. That's the statute of limitations for, 2.5 years is statute of limitations for medical malpractice, but that doesn't toll until someone reaches the age of majority, which is 18. So if you have a pediatric patient that's transported, you have until they turn 18 to initiate a malpractice action on their behalf. So I guess you could, I guess you could get legal to kind of an attorney, hospital physician, or hospital attorneys to figure out what that is. I don't know if there's a current practice in place at the county of recording every call and keeping it. Does anybody know what they do currently?
At ECMC, no. Every call is recorded. I don't have the answer in front of me of how long those are retained, but we can certainly find out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that I would opposed to recording these calls. I think I'm opposed to writing them down. That's a waste. I think they're only as good as it's like a medical record. It's only as good as the person who wrote down what's in it. So that to me next to useless. And I'm old enough to remember piles of these things sitting around in emergency rooms where I've worked over years and they end up in a circular file.
We still do it at ECMC. Yeah.
So I mean, if we're going to do it, it should be audio recordings. I'm not opposed to it. I think it's only as good as the data you receive, right? So having it for QA if it's important, because if the information transmitted to you is not reliable, it doesn't mean good. As far as liability goes, I don't think there's a lot of liability for anybody giving medical direction from an emergency room to a team in the field. Barring the fact that you say something that's completely erroneous and places a patient in clear jeopardy in flies in the face of any reason. You know, the liability unfortunately lies with the crew in the field. They have to follow, you know, the protocols that have been set out, and they have to do, you know, transmit accurate information. So I think the liability issue is very low, is a low concern. But having this information, I think, is not unreasonable. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not sure. I don't know if I did speak, if I sounded like that last time, I must have misspoke, or I got hit in the head or something between now and then. I don't know.
Well, I appreciate those insights, Ed. I agree with you. You know, I think it's 2023. I think, you know, audio is sort of the standard, and certainly going to be the most accurate record of, you know, no matter how thoroughly you write things down. And certainly physicians are known for having very legible handwriting, especially 5 or 7 years later when we're trying to figure out what it was that we wrote. And, you know, historically, in terms of providing medical direction, right, as a national standard, NAMSP is not aware of any cases where a provider, you know, giving medical direction online on the phone, you know, that has been held responsible for, again, you know, sound medical recommendations, even if there was a bad outcome. There's a difference between, you know, someone saying, I'm not sure where this tube is, and you saying, well, why don't you pull it out if you don't know, and just bag them and do your best. That's sound medical judgment. There's a difference between that and someone calling and saying, I think this tube's in the esophagus, and you say, well, it's probably fine, just leave it there, we'll see you when you get here. That's dangerous and potentially an actionable thing depending on what happens. So I think there is a distinction there. You know, from my perspective, you know, at ECMC we still do paper, but we also record everyone, and I don't know why we do both. I'm going to try to get rid of the paper soon. But, you know, I'm inclined to suggest that we pass this as written, you know, requiring facilities that want to give medical direction in the region to maintain audio recordings. I suspect it would be, you know, left largely up to the facilities to determine how long they record, you know, how long they retain those in discussions with their own administration and their own council. I would hope that everybody would be willing to hold it for at least 6 months. Just that way, and then if there's a reason it's flagged for review or something, then perhaps it can be retained longer. It depends. You know, there are other agencies I work with that record their own internal calls, and their policies, they keep them for 6 months unless it's flagged to retain. And that way, as a practice, they're all sort of discarded after 6 months unless we go into the system and say to keep it. It would also be important that these recordings be made available in some fashion to the Quality Improvement Committee and the WREMAC chair for review. I don't think they need to be necessarily sent out of the facility. Some facilities may have some concerns about that in terms of records and privacy, and those would be reasonable concerns, but perhaps in those cases, if we really did need to hear it, we could either hear it over the phone where somebody from the facility plays it for us, or we could even make a trip into the facility to just listen to it in person. But that stuff can be sorted out, I think, on the individual level once we determine that we're going to retain the calls to begin with. Any other thoughts?
I think that might pose a problem, as you mentioned, from a system integrity point of view, in terms of, I don't know if legal will be cool on that, people outside engaging the PI from outside the system doing that, but I think the intent is good. The other thing I would suggest is, do we put a timeline on compliance with this request?
Yeah.
Well, it is relatively easy to do. It's not that easy. It requires some work.
Sure.
You know.
Sure, and I mean every hospital I know of is feeling quite a financial pinch, so it may take some time to get something like this that administration may not view as high priority, which I understand managed. So, you know, I would like to see, you know, sort of a phase-in period, whether that's, you know, 6 months or something like that, or even the start of 2024. There's somebody who's raising their hand in the back.
Yeah. One of the things that over at Catholic Health, and I know we've pounded this into the pavement about Pulsera and using it over there, they do record calls through the app. So if that was a recommendation that the WREMAC at some point, maybe after some investigation, might be willing to make, then that would take some of the load off the systems to maintain those recordings, because it's maintained through the app.
Okay, so for people on the phone, in case that didn't come through, it was just pointed out that you know, Catholic Health using Pulsera. Pulsera does have the ability to record calls that come through it, so that may be a potential solution for the agencies and facilities that are using Pulsera now or considering using it in the future. So that would be an option. I think, you know, to me, does 6 months seem, or does the start of, you know, January 1st, 2024 seem like a reasonable timeline, or do we want to propose a different one? Any thoughts? Seems like that gives us the better part of 6 months, a little under 6 months.
I might just hold on, I don't know, maybe I might say longer period than that.
Okay.
Just knowing, as you mentioned, the prioritization of expenditures of money and things, there's a lot of things going on. It's not, this isn't important, but
Yeah.
in the hierarchy, it may be pushed down the list.
I understand. Okay, then I would propose we amend this, or we add to this policy just a qualifier that you know, all agencies in the Western region that, or excuse me, all facilities in the Western region that meet the requirements and would like to provide online medical control within the region will be expected to have the capability to record and review all medical direction calls. We'll say maybe by July 1st, 2024. That gives us a year, and we would encourage facilities to do it faster as able, but certainly understanding that there are factors that are beyond the control of the emergency department. And I think that would be a good target date. And if there's a facility that's having trouble meeting even that, you know, certainly can send a letter to the REMAC to see if we can either come up with an extension or help speed things along in some way.
Or if there's, you know, implementation issues, discussed with the REMAC or the program agencies, and
And this policy doesn't really address, you know, how long to record or who gets to review, and I think that's by design, because it's the REMAC can't speak for all the facilities and certainly can't speak for their attorneys. So I think those are details that we can work out at a later time once we can assure that the calls are being retained to begin with, and then we can figure out, you know, who and how reviews happen. Certainly the facilities can review on their own, which will be a great benefit, I think, to everybody. So as written, with the addition of expected by July 1st, 2024, any further discussion on the draft policy?
Dr. O'Brien, this is Todd Reisner.
Hi, Todd.
Do we want to speak to the language in agency and systems online medical control? Are we going to hold those entities to the same standards as the facilities? Because that's what it reads at.
I'm just taking a look here. So agency medical directors or physicians acting as part of an organized system providing online medical control outside the hospital setting may do so provided they meet all of the criteria to provide medical direction. Except for those that are specific to hospitals or emergency departments, they must meet provider requirements delineated below. You know, I'm inclined to say yes, and we can discuss that now. I think that, you know, the spirit of this policy is that if medical direction is being given, right, we need to have a record of that. And individual medical directors that choose to have their agencies call them directly, and I am one of them, you know, should in their own interest, and certainly in the interest of the agency and the patients they're caring for, keep a record of that as well. I personally have an app that I use that records all the calls that come to me for medical direction. It is not expensive. I'm not going to name it unless somebody asks me directly, because I don't have any relationship with anybody, but there are lots of apps and features by which we can do this. So that would be my inclination, but it's an open discussion. What are everybody's thoughts? Okay, yes, sir.
Would there be an issue with like being HIPAA compliant, possibly? Like, I know that it's usually not patients, well, you know, there could be some identifiers, so I think that there would probably be an increased cost with having something that would have that level of compliance.
Yep, several of the apps are specifically like HIPAA certified, and I'm sure there is an extra cost to those. The one I use advertises itself as HIPAA compliant. I think that part is going to have to be the responsibility of the person, you know, the individual taking the call and maintaining that record, but that's a good point. So the question for those on the phone was, you know, is there going to be an issue for HIPAA and whatnot for any protected health information that may be discussed during those calls, because that certainly happens. And I feel like that's probably the responsibility of the individual medical control provider that wants calls directed to them. Any further discussion on the question? All right. Is there any kind of motion to accept as amended? Or another motion? Oh, is that Dr. Teuscher? We have a motion, but, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Kenyon, sorry, you don't sound like Dr. Teuscher at all. All right, so a motion by Dr. Kenyon to approve as amended with the July 1st compliance date. Is there a second? All right, we had a couple seconds. I heard Teuscher first. All right, there's a motion and a second. All in favor? That's a bad way to do it. Any opposition on the telephone from voting members? Hearing none. Any opposition in the room? Okay, the motion carries with unanimous consent. Thank you, everybody. Other issues. Interfacility Transport Committee. Todd, you're on the phone, right? Any updates? I know there's a meeting coming up.
Yep, we have a meeting on the 29th. I believe we're going to pause for the summer after the 29th meeting and reconvene first part of September. We've made some good progress. The embedded SET protocols, specific protocols have been drafted, and now we are making our way through the actual medications, making suggested additions and deletions. I hope to have a draft document for the committee to present to the WREMAC by the November meeting.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This is by far the most progress we've had on this initiative in, I don't know, 8 years. So thank you very much. All right. So then I skipped over the chairman's report on purpose. We'll do that before we move on to old business. The bylaws review that I had said we would vote on today, I tabled because I did not get them to the regional councils with enough notice to review as I had promised to do. So rather than ask everyone to approve things, they only had a chance to look at last night. We will plan to do that at the September meeting. I will send them out sometime over the summer, and I promise the regional councils will have at least 4 weeks to review them before we ask for a vote from anybody. There will be mostly the changes we discussed already about membership. I'm still tweaking some language about what constitutes a quorum, since we're having a lot more members in the new version, with each agency medical director being able to cast a vote. So once I get those things worked out, I will send them out for review and comment, and we can hope to start our new WREMAC year in September, voting on our bylaws. That's it for the chairman's report, so that'll bring us to old business, which was the bylaws review, and I just tabled that. So any other old business that wasn't on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move ahead to new business. There is, I'll get to number one in just one moment. Just so we know, under current approvals and notifications of intent, I did receive one from All-Star EMS to begin using tranexamic acid. That was approved by their medical director, so that will be included in the approvals when we get to it. But first, Mr. Peterson is here. Erie County EMS is looking for a letter of support for their new CS application as they pursue a municipal CON for their ambulance transport service. You want to come up, sir? Thank you. All right, just taking a quick look. Application for change in level of care. Dr. McGee. All right. I can say that the paperwork is complete. The application for change in level of care, the medical director verification, and the medical director EMS agency agreements have been signed by the medical director, by the ALS systems coordinator, and by the agency chief executive, who is Mr. Polenkars. So we will add that to our mass approvals as well. If it passes, I will issue a letter of support, as we have in the past, for the CS application, so they can move forward with their ultimate CON application and operating certificate as an ALS transport agency. Let's see. They're also included in a separate email today were the revised WREMAC collaborative protocol formulary, the medication formulary, as well as the WREMAC equipment list. These were included in an email from Karen today. These were worked on by a number of people. Mr. McCartan was working most on these with Mr. Shaw. Any thoughts, comments, concerns, discussion? These were really updates in terms of the formulary, and there's also updates going on through the various education programs in the region to get out some old medications that we no longer carry and no longer interact with. ECC is going to stop quizzing people on verapamil and terbutaline pretty soon. We haven't carried those in quite some time. Working on it, I promise. Any discussion on these two? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to accept?
Kenyon.
Kenyon motion, second McNamara. Is that okay? Thank you, sir. Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion carries. Both of these are approved. Rob or Mike, would one of you email these to, actually, no, never mind, they were emailed already. So Alicia, if you would, when you have a moment, please post the WREMAC equipment list and the collaborative protocol formulary medication list to the WREMAC website, if you would.
Is it sent to me in a Word document so I can add the effective date?
Oh, yep, sure, that's easy. We can take care of that. All right, so then, thank you. Any other new business before we talk about mass approvals? All right, hearing none. Our current approvals are medical director change, Terry's Corners volunteer fire from Dr. Franco to Dr. Mangione, Eggertsville fire from Dr. Borton to currently no one, and that means it's me as the WREMAC chair. We will update the group once a determination is made within hopefully 90 days to find a new medical director as required by WREMAC policy, but in the meantime, what's going on, Eggertsville? Number 2, CPAP approval from Portville Fire District, and TXA approval for All-Star EMS, and Erie County's letter of support for their CS application. I would entertain a motion to approve them en masse.
Toysher approved.
Toysher, is there a second?
Kenyon.
Kenyon, any opposition? Hearing none, the motions carry and they are all approved as written. Final issue of business for the summer, and this is just a matter of, I guess, I don't know, tradition and formality, since I would probably do this anyway. But we traditionally conclude our meetings with a motion for the WREMAC chair to conduct the business of the WREMAC as necessary with interim approvals pending formal approval at the September meeting of anything that I do. Obviously, I try not to make big region-shaking decisions without consulting the WREMAC, but routine business, I like to keep the wheels moving and keep the systems going. So if we can talk about doing that, that will be something that's in the new bylaws. We're just going to say that over the summer, the WREMAC chair can issue approvals and use their judgment on what requires actually convening an emergency meeting of the WREMAC over the summer or at any other time. So is there anybody that wants to let me do my job while none of us come to meetings over the summer?
Motion.
Dr. McNamara, very quick. Is there a second? I can't second my own, so. Anybody else?
I'll second that. Kenyon.
Thank you, Dr. Kenyon. Any opposition? Excellent. The motion carries. I will keep things going as I'm able. That would bring us to the end of the meeting. Thank you all for being here. I would take a motion to adjourn. Dr. McNamara does not really require a second, so we will call it adjourned. Thank you all for what you do. Have a wonderful summer. We will see you in September.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph.